Well, welcome to Vineyard 401. This is going to be a talk on how to deal with conflict in ministry. Now, here's the little secret that we don't advertise on the front end of leadership. We like to teach this as you get into it. But when you get into leadership, one thing I can promise you that you'll be dealing with is conflict. And so actually, the greater your leadership, the more conflict you'll probably deal with, because it means that the more people you're leading, the more chances for people to have conflicts come into play. So one of the things that a leader has to become skilled in if they want to be a good leader is how to resolve conflict. And so this can be conflict with people that you're leading. It can be conflict with other fellow leaders. It can be conflict within the organization, within team, even really in your own relationships, marriage, friendships, whatever. So conflict comes at us in different ways. And I always like to say, anytime you spend an extended period of time with somebody, you're going to probably end up having some conflict. So marriages, roommates, team ministry, all of those things are the kinds of settings where we experience conflict. Conflict doesn't mean that you're a bad leader. Conflict arises because of different reasons. We're going to look at some of those. It's really how we deal with conflict is the big issue, not that we have it. All conflict, all relationships have some level of conflict, but how we deal with the conflict is really the big issue. Another thing that I think is important is that Jesus gave us some clues on how to deal with conflict. In Matthew 5, he talked about how if you're taking a gift to the altar in worship and you remember that you have something against a brother or sister, he actually says, leave, go get that right, and then come back. And I think what that's trying to teach us, and it's similar to what Paul said, don't let the sun go down on your anger, is he's teaching us to deal with conflict quickly. Now, what I found is that most of us don't like to deal with conflict, right? We'd rather avoid it, or we'd rather do some kind of passive-aggressive technique or something like that. So we act like nothing's wrong, and then we just blow up every now and then. But really, what we have to do is mature in our ability to detect conflict. We need to grow in our ability then to engage it in a positive way versus just avoiding it or sort of blowing up every now and then in anger. And I'd say those are probably the two most popular ways that people deal with conflict. One is they avoid it, or two, they hold it in until they blow up. And so what we're going to try to talk about is how to deal with it in a godly way, a Jesus way. And so dealing with it quickly is important. And as a leader, you're going to have a lot of interactions with people, and not everybody is going to let you know that they have a problem with you up front. In other words, what I found is that most people don't have the maturity to actually come to you and talk to you about an issue that they need to talk to you about. Most people that you lead will probably go talk to somebody else about an issue that you need, that they should be talking to you about, but they'll go talk to a third party about it. So they triangulate. So you have a problem with me, but you kind of don't want to talk to me about it, so you talk to your friend about it, or you talk to a coworker about it. Most people will do that. And so sometimes you hear about conflict third hand, all right? Well, if it's somebody that you lead, it's somebody that you're close to, you kind of have to not stir that behind the back talking. You need to go directly to the person and just say, hey, do we need to sit down and talk? I think we do. So I always encourage conflict resolution to be face-to-face encounters. I don't think telephone conversations are a great way to deal with conflict. I don't think email is a great way to deal with conflict, and I certainly don't think text messages are a great way to deal with conflict. I think you need to deal with conflict one-on-one, face-to-face, all right? Anytime you get a hint that somebody's got something going on, whether you're aware of what it is or not, if you feel a change in the relationship, that's something you need to be intuitive about and pick up on. So like some people might smile at you and say hi to you every time they see you, and then all of a sudden one time they don't even look you in the eye. And you're going, I think they saw me, but they didn't act the same way toward me. Another number of people will deal with conflict that way, where they'll give you sort of sideways signals about the conflict. So then basically what a mature leader needs to do is just initiate a conversation. Hey, I just sensed something's going on. Can we sit down and talk about this? And just initiate a dialogue, all right? So that's the first thing, is that you need to deal with it quickly. You need to kind of always have your intuitive sensors out in terms of relationships and pick up on clues, because a lot of people won't just come to you directly when there's a conflict, all right? I think the second thing that Jesus teaches us is from Matthew 18, and basically it just talks about the principle of when you have an issue with another brother or sister in Christ, that the first step is always to go to that person. It's not to talk to other people about it. It's always to go to that person and talk to that person about it. Now, what I found is that a lot of people do is if they're having a problem with somebody, if they do initiate a conversation, they typically do it in an attack mode. And anytime you attack somebody, and by that I don't mean physically, but I'm talking about just with words, like if you go to somebody and you're having a problem with them and you accuse them or blame them for the issues that you're feeling, that's what I mean by attack. And so you start off the conversation right out the gates by accusing them or blaming them for their bad behavior, and that's why you're having a problem. If you start it off like that, typically that throws the whole conversation into a defense mode, and then you're battling, who did the right thing, who did the wrong thing. What I've learned through the years is that when you go and talk to a person, it's better to say, hey, I think we need to talk about something. You want to open up a dialogue versus attack, okay? So do we need to talk about something? I'm sensing there's something going on. Or I have something I just need to talk to you about. Could we dialogue about this a little bit? So what you're doing is engaging a person in an open conversation, open dialogue. Now, if they agree to talk to you, then here's a couple of strategies that you need to deal with. And basically what I'm going to suggest is that you don't try to go on blame mode, attack mode, but you're going to go into listening mode. You're going to go into information gathering and listening. And I basically call this as an exercise of like getting everything out on the table. And you get everything out on the table by asking good questions and then listening well, all right? This is a huge, huge key to successful conflict resolution. So let's say if you're having an issue in your own heart, then you might just go to the person and say, hey, I need to talk to you about something. Something's kind of just been going around in my head. I just really need to talk about it with you. And so then you might say, lately when we've been interacting, I've been having this emotion, and you own your own emotion. You're not blaming them for it. You own your own emotion. You say, I've just been feeling like X, Y, and Z. You own it. You describe it, and then you don't blame them for it. You just say, can you give me any insight on that? Can we talk about this a little bit? So you're getting your emotion out on the table, but you're not coming at it as blaming them. You're coming at it as wanting to get their perspective, their input. And then if they talk, then you can ask more questions, and then you can get information out on the table. And what I've found is that most of the time I'm on the other end where people haven't told me the problem that they're having with me, and I pick up on these other signals. And so then I'll engage them. I say, I just think something seems like it's funny. Something's going on. I noticed that you don't look at me anymore, or something like that. And so then I say, can we get together and talk? And then they'll say, usually, sure. So then what I do is sit down at the table and engage them in questions. So what's going on? Has there been any change? What are you feeling? What are you sensing? What's going on in your heart? So you're asking questions. So basically, you want to get them to talk, get them to share what's going on in their heart, get everything out on the table. And I always like to say that we need to probe a little bit to make sure that everything comes out, right? Because sometimes people might have 3 different issues with you, and they might share the first 2 issues that really aren't the big deal issues. It might be a third issue that they're nervous about talking about that's really the big deal. And so if you get only 2 issues, but the biggest issue isn't even on the table yet, then you're never going to resolve the conflict at that point. You've got to get the biggest issue out on the table. And so you might probe 2 or 3 times, is there anything else that we need to talk about? Like if you walk away from here and you're riding home in the car, you're going to be thinking, I should have talked about this. Is there any of those things still that aren't on the table yet? And I just use this kind of language. And so then you want to get it all out on the table. And at this point, all you're doing is just listening. You're asking questions and you're listening. You're asking questions and you're listening. I think our empowering course is an excellent course on listening skills and actually helps walk you through good listening skills. And this is perfect to do in conflict resolution. The tricky part about listening skills when you're dealing with conflict resolution is that a lot of times people won't be following the suggestions I'm giving you right now. So a lot of times they'll be blaming you, they'll be accusing you, and immediately you feel defensive, right? And so you feel those defense things, and so you want to come up with a reason why you're not wrong and they're wrong. But that'll shut down the communication process. You've got to step into maturity here, dial your own defenses down, even if they're going, Fred, you're an idiot. Fred, you're this, you're that, and it's all stuff that you don't really like to hear about yourself, but you want to dial back your defenses. This takes some level of maturity with your own emotions. Continue to ask questions, continue to listen, continue to think about what they're getting out on the table, actually kind of putting yourself in their shoes a little bit. And so even asking second and third questions about the same question is another way to do that, making sure if you even restate what they just said. I'm hearing you say this, is this what you're saying? You restate it, and then if they can say, yeah, that's exactly what I mean, then you're probably having good communication, all right? So let's look at some of the kinds of conflicts that are typical for a leader, and I'm just going to highlight one of these. And the first one is the one I think is the most important one to deal with first, okay? And it would be in the category of hurts. Number one would be hurts. All right, so if somebody feels hurt by you, that is going to cause an offense. And that causes an emotional reaction. And probably you're not going to have much success with dealing with anything else unless you first deal with the hurt, okay? So you want to first find out if there's hurts. If there's hurts, then the way you heal a hurt is you want to ask for forgiveness, all right? Ask for forgiveness. Now, here's a big secret that I learned along the way that I want to encourage you in. I used to, in my earlier days, somebody would tell me a way that I hurt them. I've literally had people say, you didn't smile at me on Sunday morning when I walked by. And they felt hurt by that. And I might have, in a bigger church, I might have just not seen them. I might have been thinking about my message. I might have been, focused on something else and just didn't see them. It was not an intentional slight. But they were wanting some kind of look from me, and so they felt hurt by that. Well, in my earlier days, I would have been more concerned with going, well, I didn't do anything wrong. You're just an idiot, So I would be more defensive in that way. But here's the thing I came to the conclusion of. When people are hurt, they're hurt, regardless of whose fault it is. It's an emotional response. And sometimes people can be hurt on things that aren't even true, right? But they can still be hurt. And so if you don't deal with the hurt, then you're not going to ever get past that hurt. It'll always be there. So what I learned to do is just not worry about whose fault it was, whether I was wrong, whether it was sin or not. A lot of times when I've hurt people, it really isn't a sin issue. And we'll get to some of the other reasons why we can have conflict. Most of the time it's just a personality issue, a miscommunication, something like that. But they feel hurt. And so what I always do is I just try to identify with their hurt and say, I'm so sorry that you felt this when I did this, or when I said this, or when I didn't do this, or when I didn't say this, right? And I just ask them, I said, will you forgive me for that? That then gives them a chance to actually make the choice to forgive me. And I like them to verbalize it, okay? If they're not ready, then they're not ready. And you can't make people forgive you, but you can give them the opportunity to choose to forgive you by humbling yourself and just simply acknowledging the hurt, acknowledging that your lack of communication or this or that or whatever was a part of that, and you ask them to forgive you. Okay? So that's really the biggest thing you have to deal with is the hurts, because you can't really move forward without first dealing with hurts. Okay, secondly, I find that in leadership, another big issue is personality. And here's where I would highly recommend a Myers-Briggs test, a DISC test, but these personality tests that are out, and do those in a team environment, are going to really help you understand how different people are wired differently. And it's not sin issues, it's not bad character issues, sometimes it's just personality issues. And I found that a host of my conflict has come from just my own personality and the way it rubs up against another personality. And so my marriage is actually the best example for that one, because my wife and I are wired very, very differently. And so we have had plenty of conflicts through 30 years of marriage, as you can so imagine. My wife is incredibly detailed, and I'm incredibly big picture. And so even when we served on staff together for 12 years, I would always be thinking big picture, big vision, get excited about a new vision. And my wife would always be the one who would be hitting the brake, because all she could think about was the 25 things, detailed things that would have to be done in order to accomplish that vision, right? Well, the trick of the thing is that actually she's right. All 25 of those things are going to have to be done, and I probably could have only thought about 3 of them. She could think about the other 22. I could have thought about 3 things that need to be done to accomplish that vision, but she could think of the 22 other things. And so what I learned along the way is that I need all the personalities, and I need detailed people around me. And then the thing is we still frustrate each other, right? But how do we do that with an understanding of that we need each other, right? And so you got to have a good understanding of personality and how different personalities play in a team environment, how different personalities bring different things to the table. This is obviously true in marriage, it's obviously true with your kids, but it's definitely true in leadership, all right? All right, a third area that we deal with is just miscommunication. Miscommunication. Now, in my case, sometimes it's lack of communication, because it's really interesting. When I'm with a person or when I'm with a group, a small group, I can know what to say and I can communicate well in the presence of people. But in organizational communication, I won't think about how those 3 conversations affect everybody else in the organization. And many times I'll even forget to tell other people about what the conversation that I had with these people that affects this person over here. And my wife can classically attest to this issue all the time, because sometimes she calls my assistant to find out what's coming up next in my life because I forget to tell her, all right? So she has had so many moments with people where somebody says, "Hey, Fred's going to be doing this," and she goes, "Oh, really? I didn't know that. Yeah, he's going to be going to Africa tomorrow." She's going, "Oh, no." That's really an exaggeration, but I don't know. Sometimes it's been close to being that bad. Anyway, so communication's a big issue. I think it does play in our personalities a little bit as well. I can try to learn to think better, but most of the time what happens is I get people around me where I acknowledge my weakness and then have them help me with that so that I'm better at communicating where I need to communicate. And so that's a big thing, because all of us will have some areas of weakness in all of these communication issues. And the more we're self-aware, the more we can try to build and buffer some of maybe the negative impact that we could have in our communication styles. So again, personality stuff's good along these lines, but so also our communication styles. And if you're an introvert, you're going to have a lot less words than an extrovert. If you process internally versus externally, There are people who process externally, who communicate probably way more than they should with their team, and the team gets frustrated because all they ever hear are ideas, and all they do is process, and nothing ever happens. That can frustrate a team. On the other hand, like with myself, I process so much internally that I can fail to communicate enough, bring enough people on board, all that kind of stuff. So you get the idea is that there's different styles in communication. And how that plays into conflict is, let's say that you were a key person that I needed to communicate something with, and I communicated to one person over here, but I didn't remember to communicate to you, and then you find out about it in a roundabout way, then you feel hurt. Well, Fred must not value me. Fred must not care about me, that kind of thing. So my point in bringing this up with my own self is that you're going to have those same kind of dynamics based on your strengths and weaknesses, based on your communication styles, based on your personality styles. You're going to rub people wrong. You're going to rub people differently. You've got to become self-aware, and then you've got to be able to hear how you come across to people. And the more ability you have to hear other people's input, the more ability you'll be able to then grow and buffer and bring people in to help you be a better communicator, and that's a huge one. Number 4 is expectations. And this is a huge one too. I really believe that everybody comes into a church setting or a community setting or a small group setting with certain expectations. But nobody ever sits down with them and says, hey, what do you expect? Like somebody comes to Vineyard Church, I often wish they could just be wearing a big sandwich board. You remember the old sandwich boards that people would wear and had advertising on the front and back? I always wish they could just walk into church and they have all their expectations written out, and I could look at them and go, that'll never happen, we'll never do that, we don't even believe in that, and we'll hit that one and we'll hit that one sometimes. You see, and then they could figure out if they want to enter into that relationship or not. But what happens is people enter into a relationship, they have all these unspoken expectations, and then you get to love them, and then later on down the road they let you know about them as they're going out the door hurt because they never talked to you about them along the way. So there's a lot of unspoken expectations that play into any community, into any team dynamic. You've got to surface expectations, all right? And so surfacing expectations along the way, having conversations about expectations is a pretty big deal. I had a friend of mine that were going to be moving overseas to plant a church, and they thought they were going to be in a co-pastor role. And once they finally sat down with the couple who was, in their minds, the lead couple, the understanding that the lead couple had was that this couple was just going to be a servant role on the team and get a job and basically, do setup and breakdown. The couple that was actually moving overseas to help plant this church was actually thinking that they were going to be co-pastors. And when they had that conversation, it was all of a sudden like, whoops, I'm not moving overseas to set up and break down. I actually thought that God was calling us here to help plant this church. And so that's just a big example. Expectations are huge. The 5th area is philosophy of ministry. And philosophy of ministry is another big conflict area. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few moments in terms of the vision of the church, the philosophy of ministry of the church, the cultural values of the church have to be communicated and surfaced so that people can know how to relate to those and navigate those. Those are cultural issues, but if you don't have alignment in philosophy of ministry, it can cause conflict as well. So that's an outline basically of 5 areas of conflict that you can experience as a leader. Let's take a moment for a ministry interactive and talk about maybe how you've already experienced some of those areas of conflict.